Tom lived in a quiet neighborhood at the edge of town. His house stood strong with clean walls, a trimmed yard, and an American flag waving gently in the breeze. To anyone who passed by, it looked like the home of a man who liked order, peace, and discipline. What most people did not know was that Tom was a retired Navy SEAL. He had spent years serving his country, traveling across oceans, and living through situations where a single mistake could cost lives. After retiring, he chose a quiet life where he could enjoy his mornings with coffee, take long walks, and read books in the evening. One sunny afternoon, Tom noticed something unusual. A dark van stopped in front of his house. Out came three men wearing matching jackets with the letters HOA printed in large bold font. They carried clipboards and looked around the yard with sharp eyes, whispering to one another as if they already owned the place. Tom watched from his porch, his sharp instincts alerting him that something about them did not feel right. The tallest man stepped forward and called out, "Mr. Tom, we are from the Homeowners Association. We need to talk about your property." Tom slowly placed his coffee cup on the small wooden table and stood up. His calm blue eyes scanned the men carefully. Their clothes were neat but their behavior was not professional. They moved with impatience, tapping their feet, glancing at each other, and not once showing a real ID badge. "I don't remember joining any homeowners association," Tom said in a steady voice. The short man smirked and flipped a few pages on his clipboard. "It's mandatory in this area. We are here to inform you that your house is not in compliance. The board has decided it should be repossessed unless you agree to pay the required fees and penalties." Tom raised an eyebrow. He had lived here for 5 years and had never heard of such rules. The neighborhood was simple and quiet, with families who minded their own business. No one had ever mentioned an HOA, much less one that could take away a house. "Do you have legal papers?" Tom asked. The men exchanged glances. The tallest one pulled out a folded sheet of paper and waved it quickly before tucking it back. Tom noticed the paper did not even have a proper seal. It was nothing more than printed words on cheap paper. Tom stayed calm, though inside he felt the familiar stir of suspicion. Years of service had taught him how to read people, and everything about these so-called officers screamed fake. Their eyes avoided his, their tone carried arrogance without authority, and their story did not fit the truth he knew about his neighborhood. "I'll need to see official identification," Tom said firmly. The men grew annoyed. The short one stepped closer, trying to intimidate Tom with his presence. But Tom did not move an inch. His posture remained strong and steady, like a mountain. "Listen, old man," the short one said, "you don't want trouble. Just hand over the paperwork for your house, and this will be easy." Tom's lips curved slightly, almost a smile but sharper, like the edge of a blade. "Trouble? You came to the wrong house if you're looking for trouble." The men stiffened. They expected fear, hesitation, maybe even panic, but instead they found a man whose calmness felt heavier than a storm. The tallest one tried again, his tone softer now. "Look, we don't want problems. Just sign the transfer and pay the dues. We'll leave you alone." Tom tilted his head and studied them. He noticed their shoes muddy, worn, and not matching their neat jackets. He noticed the van, its plates covered with dirt as if someone tried to hide them. And he noticed their hands restless, tapping the clipboards, never steady. These were not officers. They were imposters, trying to scare him into giving up his house. Instead of showing anger, Tom used silence. He turned and walked inside his house without saying a word. The men shouted behind him, demanding that he return, but Tom ignored them. Inside, he calmly picked up his phone and dialed a number. It was not the police, not yet. Tom called his old friend Mark, who worked as a local lawyer. If these men thought they could cheat him with fake documents, Tom wanted to know the best way to expose them. When Tom returned outside, the men were waiting near the porch, shifting uncomfortably. They had expected him to argue or even shout, but they did not expect his calm patience. "I've contacted my lawyer," Tom said in a clear voice. "If you are real officers, you will have no problem showing proper documents. If you are not, then you should leave before the police get involved." The tallest man muttered something under his breath. The short one cursed softly, then glanced at the van. For a moment, it looked like they might leave. But instead, they stood their ground, glaring at Tom as if they were testing how far they could push him. Tom's eyes narrowed. He had seen this look before in places far from home, in men who thought intimidation was enough to win. But he also knew something they didn't. He was not a man who could be pushed. He was a retired Navy SEAL, trained for storms far greater than this. The men didn't know it yet, but they had chosen the wrong house, and the wrong man, for their scheme. The next morning, Tom woke up early as usual. He brewed his coffee, stepped onto his porch, and looked out over the quiet street. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. Children would soon be heading to school, and parents would leave for work. Everything looked calm on the surface, but Tom's mind stayed alert. He knew the men from yesterday had not come by accident. People like that did not give up after one failed attempt. Tom had spent years in the Navy, learning that every unusual event had a reason behind it. If those men wanted his house, then there had to be a larger plan. He also knew they would come back, and when they did, he had to be ready. After finishing his coffee, Tom walked around the house, checking every detail. He made sure the locks were firm, the doors secure, and the cameras he had installed years ago still worked. His military habits never left him, and though he had never expected to need them in a quiet town, he was glad he had kept them. Later that day, Tom's phone rang. It was Mark, his lawyer friend. "I looked into the papers you told me about," Mark said. "There's no registered HOA for your neighborhood. Nothing legal at all. Whoever those men are, they're running a scam." Tom nodded to himself. He had suspected as much, but it was good to hear confirmation. "Thanks, Mark. I'll keep you updated," Tom replied. Mark added, "Be careful. Scammers like these don't work alone. If they're bold enough to come to your door, they might try something bigger." That warning stayed in Tom's mind. By afternoon, the same dark van rolled into the street. This time, there were 4 men. The 3 from yesterday plus another who looked older, with sharp eyes and a heavy voice that carried authority. They parked in the same spot and walked toward Tom's yard with forced confidence. The older man introduced himself. "Name's Harris. I'm the chief officer of this association. Yesterday my men told me you refused to cooperate. That won't be good for you." Tom studied him carefully. Harris carried himself like a leader of the group, but not like a professional. His jacket was too new, as if it had been bought just for the role he was pretending to play. His shoes were scuffed, and his folder of papers looked like it had been printed the night before. "I told your men already," Tom said calmly. "There is no legal HOA here. Show me real documents with seals and signatures, or leave my property." Harris smirked. "You think you're smart. But we've handled people like you before. You'll see that fighting us only makes things harder. Why lose your home when you can just sign and walk away?" Tom's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained steady. "This house is not leaving my hands. You'll have to deal with the law before you deal with me." The men exchanged annoyed glances. The short one from yesterday stepped forward again, trying to act tough. "We'll be back. You can't stop us." Tom let out a slow breath. "You're right. I can't stop you from coming back. But every time you do, I'll be more ready than before." For a moment, silence filled the yard. The imposters seemed unsettled by his words. They expected anger, maybe shouting, but not calm determination. That calmness felt like a wall they couldn't break. Finally, Harris motioned for his men to return to the van. Before leaving, he pointed at Tom. "We'll return, old man. And next time, you won't like what happens." The van drove off, leaving a trail of dust behind. Tom stood still, his jaw tight. He didn't feel fear, but he knew things were about to escalate. These men were not simply after easy money. They were desperate, maybe part of a larger scam targeting multiple houses. And now, because he refused, they would try to pressure him even harder. That evening, Tom went into his storage room. He opened a locked cabinet and pulled out a small black box. Inside were tools from his past life, not weapons, but survival gear, night vision, ropes, and small devices he had kept after leaving the service. They reminded him of missions where preparation made the difference between success and failure. He checked the batteries, cleaned the lenses, and tested the devices. His movements were precise, steady, practiced. Though years had passed, the habits of a Navy SEAL were still in him. By nightfall, Tom sat at his porch again, sipping tea this time. The stars shone brightly, and the street was silent. Yet Tom's eyes kept scanning the shadows. He knew the imposters would come back, and when they did, they might not knock politely on his door. At that same moment, in the dark van parked miles away, Harris spoke to his men. "That old man thinks he can outsmart us. Tomorrow night, we'll make him see who's in charge. Get ready." The men nodded, unaware that the house they planned to target belonged not just to a quiet retiree but to someone who had faced storms, dangers, and enemies far worse than them. The game had only begun, and Tom was more than ready. The following evening, Tom felt the air grow heavy. The day had passed quietly, but silence often carried secrets. Years of military life had sharpened his instincts, and those instincts whispered that something was about to happen. He kept the lights inside his house low, leaving only a dim glow in the living room. To anyone outside, it looked like an old man had gone to bed early. But Tom was far from sleeping. He sat near the window, his sharp eyes watching the street, his mind calm and steady. Around midnight, the dark van appeared again. This time, its headlights were off. The vehicle rolled slowly down the street and stopped a short distance away. 4 men climbed out, dressed in black clothes, moving quietly as if they were shadows. They carried bags that looked heavy, and their eyes darted around nervously. From his position, Tom observed their every move. He noticed how the tall man led the way, while Harris stayed behind, whispering instructions. The short man fumbled with something in his bag, probably tools to break into the house. Their plan was clear: they wanted to sneak in at night and scare him into submission. Tom's lips curved into a faint smile. He had faced night raids before, but never as the target. Tonight, however, he was not the prey. He was the watchman, and the hunters had no idea they had walked into the wrong field. Quietly, Tom slipped on a small headset connected to an old earpiece. He wasn't calling anyone, but he used it to block out noise and focus on every sound outside. He grabbed a small flashlight with a red filter, a rope, and a whistle he had used during training drills. His tools were simple, but in skilled hands, simple tools could do wonders. The first man stepped over Tom's fence, landing softly in the yard. The others followed, crouching low, their movements clumsy compared to the trained precision Tom was used to. They thought the darkness hid them, but Tom saw everything through the glow of his night vision device. When the short man reached for the back door, Tom made his move. He pressed the whistle to his lips and let out a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the night. The men froze, startled, their heads whipping around. Before they could react, Tom flicked on his red filter flashlight and shone it from the porch. The eerie glow lit their faces in a strange, unsettling way. To them, it must have felt like being caught by a ghost. "Wrong house," Tom's voice rang out, calm but firm. The men panicked. The short one dropped his bag with a loud thud. Harris barked orders, trying to regain control, but his voice shook with frustration. The tall man tried to climb back over the fence, but Tom had already tied one end of his rope to a hook. With a quick pull, he sent the rope flying across the path, causing the man to trip and fall into the grass. Tom did not attack them. He didn't need to. He used fear, surprise, and control, the same tools he had learned long ago. "Leave my property," Tom warned. "Next time, the police will not just hear from me. They will find you caught right here." Harris stepped forward, his anger boiling. "You think you've won, old man? You can't stop us all the time. We'll keep coming back until you give in." Tom's eyes stayed fixed on him. "You don't understand what you've walked into. I don't break, and I don't scare. Every time you return, you'll leave with less courage than before." The men hesitated. They wanted to fight, but the weight of Tom's words and the sharpness of his presence kept them frozen. Finally, Harris waved for them to retreat. They scrambled back to the van, breathing hard, looking over their shoulders as if expecting Tom to chase them. When the engine roared to life and the van sped away, Tom finally lowered his flashlight. He untied the rope, coiled it neatly, and placed his tools back in the box. His heartbeat was steady, his mind clear. It had been years since he had faced danger directly, but his body still moved with the same rhythm it always had. Yet, as he sat down again on the porch, Tom knew something important. These men would not give up easily. They had invested too much effort to walk away empty-handed. If Harris was willing to risk a night raid, then there had to be a bigger reason behind this scheme. Tom leaned back in his chair and looked at the stars. He thought of his neighbors' families who lived quietly, unaware of the threat lurking in the shadows. Maybe the imposters weren't just after him. Maybe they planned to target other houses too. The idea gave Tom a new mission. It was no longer only about protecting his own home. It was about making sure his whole neighborhood stayed safe. He made a decision then and there. Tomorrow, he would speak to his neighbors. He would let them know about the imposters and warn them about the scam. Together, they could stand stronger than alone. For now, though, Tom closed his eyes for a moment. The night had tested him, but the battle was far from over. The fake officers thought they were clever, but they had chosen to play a game against a man trained to win. And the game was only beginning. The morning after the night raid, Tom stood on his porch with a cup of coffee in hand. His yard looked peaceful, but the memory of shadows sneaking across it still rested fresh in his mind. He knew the men would return, and next time, they might come with more numbers or a more dangerous plan. He could handle himself, but he could not ignore the fact that others in the neighborhood might be their next target. Tom decided it was time to take action beyond his own property. By mid-morning, he walked down the street, knocking on doors one by one. Most of his neighbors knew him as the quiet veteran who kept his yard neat and waved politely. Few of them knew about his Navy past, but they respected him. At the first house, Mrs. Green, a kind woman in her 60s, answered the door. She smiled warmly. "Morning, Tom. You're up early, as always." Tom gave a small nod. "Morning, ma'am. I need to talk to you about something important. Have you seen a dark van around here?" 4 men, wearing jackets with HOA letters on them. Her smile faded. "Yes, actually. They came by 2 days ago. Said they were checking my house for violations. They told me I had to pay a fine for having my flower pots near the sidewalk. I didn't like their tone, so I refused. They left angry." Tom's jaw tightened. "You did the right thing. Those men are not real officers. They're scammers trying to steal homes." Mrs. Green gasped. "I knew something was wrong. Thank you for warning me." Tom moved on to the next house, then another, and another. Each family had a story. The so-called HOA officers had visited nearly every home on the block. Some neighbors had been threatened with fines, others with eviction. A few had even handed over small amounts of money out of fear. By the time Tom finished speaking to half the neighborhood, a small crowd had gathered on the street. People looked worried but also angry. Tom raised his voice so everyone could hear. Listen carefully. These men are not officers. They are imposters. They came to my house at night, trying to break in. If we don't stand together, they will keep coming back until someone loses everything. A man named Robert, who lived 2 houses away, stepped forward. So what do? We can't fight criminals. Tom nodded. We don't need to fight. We need to prepare. We need to watch each other's homes, share information, and contact the police every time these men show up. If they see we're united, they won't find it so easy to push us. Murmurs of agreement spread through the group. Mrs. Green added, Tom's right. We've all been too quiet, too trusting. But together, we can protect our street. Tom then shared his idea of forming a neighborhood watch. He explained simple steps: installing cameras, keeping outdoor lights on at night, and writing down license plate numbers. He even offered to teach basic safety habits he had learned in the service. The neighbors listened closely. They saw the calm strength in his eyes and felt a sense of hope. By afternoon, the group had already divided tasks. Robert and 2 others volunteered to contact the local police and file official reports about the imposters. Mrs. Green offered her living room for regular meetings. Several younger residents promised to set up cameras facing the street. Tom felt proud of them. Ordinary people, not trained for conflict, yet willing to stand up when pushed. It reminded him of a truth he had learned long ago: strength was not just in one person's skill, but in the unity of many. That night, Tom sat in Mrs. Green's living room with 10 neighbors. They drew a map of the street and marked every house that had been approached by the fake HOA. Almost every home had a mark. This confirmed Tom's suspicion: the imposters were not after a single property. They wanted control of the entire block. They think they can scare us one by one, Tom explained, pointing at the map. But now we're together. We'll make it impossible for them to move in without being seen. The neighbors agreed. For the first time in days, their fear began to turn into determination. As the meeting ended, Robert whispered to Tom, I don't know how you stay so calm, but it helps. You make us feel like we can handle this. Tom gave a small smile. Calmness doesn't mean I don't see danger. It means I'm ready for it. And now, so are all of you. When Tom walked home that night, the street felt different. Porch lights glowed brighter, curtains were drawn with more purpose, and people peeked out of windows, alert. The neighborhood was awake. But far away, in a dusty warehouse, Harris and his men were also making plans. Harris slammed his fist on a table. That old man is rallying the whole block against us. If we let this continue, our work is ruined. We need to scare them, all of them, before they grow too bold. The short man asked nervously, what if the police get involved? Harris's eyes burned with greed. By the time the police understand what's happening, we'll already own the deeds we came for. Tomorrow night, we show them real fear. The imposters had no idea that Tom already expected them. The stage was set for a larger clash, one that would decide whether the neighborhood stayed safe or fell into the wrong hands. The following night, the neighborhood was different. Porch lights shone brightly on every house, motion sensors were active, and a few neighbors even sat on their porches, sipping tea while pretending to relax. But under that calm surface, everyone was alert. They knew the imposters would come again. Tom walked slowly along the street, checking on each house. He carried no weapon, only a flashlight and his calm authority. His presence reassured the families who now looked to him as their leader. He didn't want that role, but he knew it had fallen to him. Years of discipline had taught him that when a group was in danger, someone had to take command. Around 10 o'clock, Tom gathered the neighbors in Mrs. Green's living room for one last talk before the night. The map of the street was laid out on the table, marked with red pins where cameras had been installed and blue pins where neighbors would keep watch. "Remember," Tom said firmly, "we're not here to fight. We're here to protect. If the imposters show up, we turn on lights, make noise, and call the police immediately. Our unity is our strength. They win only if we panic." The neighbors nodded, their faces serious. Even the younger ones, who had never faced real trouble before, seemed determined. By midnight, the street had grown quiet again. A soft wind rustled the trees. Then, just as Tom expected, headlights flickered in the distance. The dark van rolled in, its engine low and steady. But this time, it wasn't alone. A second van followed closely behind. From the shadows, Harris stepped out with 6 men, not just 3 or 4. They spread across the street, their jackets still carrying the false HOA letters, though their act was no longer convincing. Their steps were louder, their faces harder. This was no polite knock, they wanted to scare the entire block at once. Tom stood at the edge of his yard, watching calmly. Harris spotted him immediately. "There he is," Harris shouted. "The old man who thinks he can lead you. Tonight, we take control. Hand over the papers, all of you, or this neighborhood will regret it." Windows opened across the street. Lights clicked on. Instead of fear, the imposters were met with a wall of brightness and the sound of voices calling out. Robert raised his phone high, already recording. Mrs. Green shouted from her porch, "We know who you are. Leave before the police come." The imposters froze for a moment, startled by the united front. They had expected scattered families, not a street standing together. Tom stepped forward, his voice steady and clear. "You tried intimidation. You tried tricks. Now you're facing a community that will not bow to you. Go back to your van, or you'll answer to the law." Harris's jaw tightened. He had not come this far to retreat. He waved his men forward. "Take the houses. Show them we mean business." The imposters spread out, walking toward the homes. But as soon as they moved, spotlights flicked on, shining directly into their eyes. Cameras clicked. Neighbors shouted from every direction. The street was alive with resistance. The short man cursed under his breath. "They're recording us. This is bad." One of the younger imposters muttered nervously, "Boss, maybe we should go. This isn't worth it." But Harris was blinded by greed and pride. He marched closer to Tom, pointing a finger at him. "You caused this. Without you, they would have given up. You think you're a hero, but you'll regret standing against us." Tom's eyes stayed calm. "I don't regret protecting my home. I don't regret standing with my neighbors. The only regret here will be yours." Just then, sirens wailed in the distance. The imposters turned their heads in panic. Robert and 2 others had called the police the moment the vans appeared, just as Tom had planned. The imposters scrambled toward their vehicles, trying to escape before the flashing lights arrived. Neighbors shouted after them, recording every second. The van engines roared to life, but in their rush, one of the drivers hit the curb and stalled for precious moments. By the time both vans sped off into the night, the police cruisers had entered the street. Officers jumped out, taking statements, asking for details. The neighbors, now filled with energy, spoke all at once. Phones were handed over with clear video evidence, showing faces, license plates, and every false threat the imposters had made. Tom gave his report quietly, offering calm and precise details. The officers nodded, impressed by how organized the neighborhood had been. One officer said, "You've done half our job for us. With this much evidence, they won't be able to hide long." When the police left, the neighbors gathered around Tom. Their faces were tired but proud. Mrs. Green patted his shoulder. "You gave us courage, Tom. Without you, we would have been too scared to resist." Tom shook his head gently. "No, you gave yourselves courage. I just reminded you what you already had inside." The group shared a quiet moment of relief. The imposters had been pushed back, and the police were now involved. But deep down, Tom knew Harris was not finished. Men like him didn't stop just because of one failed attempt. He would return, angrier, more desperate, and more dangerous. As Tom walked back to his house, he felt the weight of the coming storm. The imposters were wounded, but a wounded enemy often struck hardest. The battle for the neighborhood was far from over. The night after the failed raid, Tom sat in his living room, staring at the map of his neighborhood spread across the table. Red pins marked cameras, blue pins marked watch points, and every street light was accounted for. The calm of the night outside was deceptive. He knew Harris and his men would not give up easily. They had been pushed back, humiliated even, and desperate people were dangerous. Tom's experience told him that when an opponent is cornered, they would strike with everything they had. That meant preparation, strategy, and vigilance were the only way to protect his home and the neighborhood. He opened his storage cabinet and checked the gear he had set aside days earlier. Ropes, flashlights, communication devices, and a few simple tools for creating alarms all were in place. He tested every battery, inspected every cord, and double-checked the cameras. Every detail mattered. By late evening, neighbors began arriving at his house. Tom had called a meeting to discuss the next steps, and most families were willing to participate. He explained calmly, "Tonight, we make sure we're prepared for anything. Harris won't come alone, and he may try new tricks. But if we stay organized, we can handle it together." Robert, who had helped record the last raid, asked, "Do we need to call the police again before they come?" Tom shook his head. "The police will respond, but our priority is to watch and protect. They cannot be everywhere at once. That's why we need cameras, lights, and each other. We become the first line of defense." The neighbors divided tasks again. Each family had a specific role. Some monitored the street from their porches, others focused on camera feeds inside their homes. Even the younger residents were ready, carrying flashlights and keeping watch from strategic points. As midnight approached, Tom took his position at the front porch. From his vantage point, he could see both ends of the street. His eyes scanned the shadows. Every leaf, every movement, every sound was noticed. Years of Navy training had honed his senses. At exactly 12:30, the dark vans appeared. Two, just as before, rolling slowly, headlights off, carrying Harris and his men. This time, they seemed different, more cautious, as if they had learned from their earlier failures. Harris stepped out first, surveying the street. His face was tense, his movements deliberate. Tom took a deep breath and spoke into his small earpiece, coordinating silently with the neighbors. "Lights on all corners in 5 seconds. Everyone ready? Now." Windows clicked open, lights flashed on, and cameras began recording. The sudden brightness caught the imposters off guard. Harris's men hesitated, unsure how to advance. The neighborhood had transformed into a living web of observation and defense. Tom stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Harris, this street belongs to real people. Leave now, or face consequences you cannot control." Harris's face twisted with anger. "You've made this personal, old man. Tonight, we finish what we started." The men tried to move forward, but every step they took triggered small alarms Tom had set along the path. Flashing lights, noise from motion sensors, and the neighbors shouting warnings made the street chaotic for the imposters. They were outnumbered, disoriented, and now, truly visible to the police who had already been called as a precaution. Harris growled. "Split up. Don't let them trap us. Tom anticipated the move. Robert, cameras on the east end. Mrs. Green, keep watch on the west. Everyone else, stay visible but safe. They can't hide from us. The imposters moved as planned, trying to circle the neighborhood, but every attempt was blocked by neighbors standing firm. Flashlights cut through the shadows, voices shouted directions, and the cameras recorded everything. Panic replaced their confidence. Finally, Harris realized the situation was hopeless. He waved his men back toward the vans. Go. We'll regroup and try again another time. As the vans sped away, Tom allowed himself a moment to breathe. The street was quiet again, but this time, it was not a fragile calm. It was the calm of victory. The neighbors had stood together, and the imposters had failed once more. Robert approached Tom, smiling. I've never seen anything like that. You kept us all calm, and we actually felt safe while it was happening. Tom nodded. Calmness is the most important weapon we have. Fear spreads faster than danger, but courage spreads even faster. Tonight, we proved that. The neighbors gathered briefly outside, sharing quiet words of relief. Their unity had been tested, and they had passed. Yet Tom knew this was not the absolute end. Harris would not stop forever. He might return months later, or someone else might try the same trick. But the difference now was clear: this neighborhood was ready. They were alert, organized, and, most importantly, led by someone who could anticipate danger and respond without panic. Tom returned to his porch, looking down the street. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the quiet sounds of a neighborhood that had reclaimed its safety. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to feel the satisfaction of a well-prepared defense. The imposters had tried to intimidate a single man, but they had awakened the strength of an entire community instead. And Tom, the retired Navy SEAL, knew that as long as he remained vigilant, the neighborhood would remain safe. A few days after the second failed raid, the neighborhood felt more alive than it had in years. Lights stayed on a little longer, neighbors waved to each other more often, and families gathered outside, sharing stories and laughter. The fear that had shadowed the streets was gone, replaced with a quiet pride. Tom walked down the street that morning, checking on his neighbors. Everyone was safe, and the imposters had not returned since the night of the organized defense. He stopped at Mrs. Green's house, where she was planting flowers in her yard. You did it, Tom, she said with a smile. You kept us safe and showed us how to protect ourselves. Tom shook his head. No, we did it together. I just helped coordinate. You all were ready to stand up for your homes. That's what made the difference. The truth was, the imposters had underestimated the strength of ordinary people. They had expected fear, silence, and compliance. Instead, they faced organization, courage, and calm determination. The neighborhood had transformed into a united front, capable of standing against any threat. That afternoon, Tom received a call from the local police. Officer Daniels, a tall man with a kind face, spoke clearly, "We've located Harris and his men. They were caught trying a similar scam in another neighborhood. With the evidence your community provided, they won't be able to bother anyone else for a long time." Tom exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. The threat was finally over. Harris and his men would not return. Their scheme had collapsed because a single man refused to be intimidated, and a neighborhood stood together behind him. Tom hung up the phone and looked around his own yard. The flowers had grown, the grass was green, and the flag still waved proudly. It all felt normal again, but this normal carried a deeper meaning now. This house, this street, and this community had been tested, and they had passed. That evening, the neighbors gathered in Mrs. Green's backyard. Tables were set with food and drinks, lights hung across the trees, and a sense of celebration filled the air. Children ran and laughed, unaware of the danger that had been so close. Parents and older neighbors shared stories, admiring the courage that had emerged from the experience. Robert approached Tom, raising his cup. "To you, Tom. You kept us safe and reminded us that we are stronger together." Tom smiled and lifted his cup. "To all of us. We protected our homes, our families, and our community. That's what matters." The night air was warm, and the stars shone brightly above. Tom felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. For years, he had faced danger in far-off places, missions that tested every skill he had learned. But nothing had compared to the quiet satisfaction of protecting a community of people who had trusted him and worked with him. Later, as the celebration quieted and neighbors returned to their homes, Tom returned to his porch. He sat in his chair, sipping a cup of tea, looking down the street. The quiet hum of life in the neighborhood surrounded him. He thought about how easily fear could take hold, but how courage and unity could turn that fear into strength. The imposters had tried to take away homes, but they had failed because they underestimated the people they were targeting. And in failing, they had created a neighborhood that would never be so easily intimidated again. Tom smiled to himself. He had lived through storms at sea, faced dangerous enemies, and been trained to survive in the toughest situations. But tonight, he realized that true strength was not just in his own skills, it was in standing with others, teaching them to be vigilant, and inspiring them to protect what mattered most. As he set down his cup, Tom thought of the future. He would continue to live quietly, enjoying the simple pleasures of his life. But he would also remain watchful, not because he expected danger, but because he knew that preparedness was the best way to keep peace. And the neighborhood, once a place of quiet routine, was now a community strengthened by courage and trust. They had faced fear together, and they had won. Tom leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. The stars above were steady, the wind whispered through the trees, and the street was finally safe. The imposters were gone, the danger had passed, and life could continue. The retired Navy SEAL had returned to his peaceful home. But more importantly, the neighborhood had discovered the power of unity, courage, and vigilance. They would never forget the lesson learned, and they would never let fear rule their streets again. In the quiet of the night, with the houses standing strong and families sleeping safely, Tom felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The imposters had failed, the community had won, and peace had been restored. It was a victory not just of one man, but of every neighbor who had stood together and refused to be intimidated. And for the first time in weeks, Tom smiled without worry. His home, his street, and his neighbors were safe, and the calm he had worked for was finally here to stay.